The words, just like acid-tipped arrows dipped in pure entitlement, came from the woman I had raised, Cassandra, my only daughter. And I quote, "I honestly think you should be grateful, Mom. You got to play house with him for 10 years, but I'm the biological parent." Frankly, an autistic man who creates a children's math app is clearly not competent to manage $3.2 million. The court will see it my way. You can go back to your little apartment, and I'll take care of everything. She sat across from me at the mahogany conference table, her perfectly tailored suit reflecting the harsh glare of the high-rise lawyer's office. Next to her, a sharp-faced attorney named Mr. Thorne offered me a pitying, smug smile. I was alone, sitting with 2 sheets of legal papers that demanded Leo, my brilliant grandson, be placed under her financial conservatorship because of his inability to function autonomously. It was a lie, a cruel, calculated lie, designed to strip everything away from the boy she hadn't seen in a decade and give it to her, his long-absent mother. Leo wasn't here. I wouldn't let him be. He was home, coding, oblivious to the battle raging over the life he had built from scratch. He was safe, and that was the only thing that mattered. Cassandra picked up a glass of water, taking a slow, theatrical sip, as if savoring her victory already. "Look at you, Mom. What are you going to do? Hire a good lawyer? With what money? You have nothing. You've been surviving on a caregiver stipend and his early app revenue, which, by the way, I'm cutting off today. The judge will grant this conservatorship because I'm family and you're just the help." Her dismissiveness was the final blow. A total erasure of a decade of my life, every sleepless night, every sensory meltdown, every breakthrough. It was a complete dismissal of the relationship that truly defined family. I looked at her, at the woman who had walked away from a beautiful, fragile little boy because he was too much work, and who was now demanding to be rewarded for her abandonment. The pressure in my chest was immense, threatening to crack my carefully constructed composure. I could feel the heat rising in my face, the desperate urge to scream the truth about her failures and her selfishness. But I didn't. I just kept my hands steady beneath the table. I took a deep breath and smiled because there was something my dear daughter didn't know. The truth began 10 years earlier, not in a sterile office, but in the overwhelming silence of an empty apartment, the day I lost everything that mattered. The silence after Cassandra slammed the door was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It wasn't just the sound of a closing door. It was the sound of a world splitting in two. One world held my carefully planned retirement, the travel fund I'd saved for 20 years, and the peace I thought I'd earned. The other world was a small 7-year-old boy named Leo, standing beside 2 small suitcases that held his entire life, clutching a tattered, well-loved copy of an engineering textbook. The yellow post-it note was almost insulting in its casualness. "Can't handle this life. Call when he's adjusted." Adjusted. As if being pulled from the only home he knew and left with his grandmother, a woman he saw only on holidays, was an adjustment to a new school schedule. Leo, whose autism meant that change was a seismic event, whose entire routine was built on meticulously structured patterns, was now adrift. That was the deepest pain, the event that defined my vulnerability. It wasn't just the shock of being an unexpected, full-time caregiver. It was the immediate, unyielding responsibility for a life that was fundamentally different and desperately fragile. My savings were instantly rerouted. The trips to Italy and Greece? Gone. They became the thousands of dollars needed for specialized sensory therapy, for the occupational therapist who helped him learn to tolerate the feeling of a toothbrush, and for the private tutor who finally figured out that Leo wasn't nonverbal, he was just processing language 3 steps ahead of everyone else. I sold my mother's pearl necklace first. Cassandra never knew. She would have seen it as easy cash. I saw it as trading a piece of my past for Leo's future. Then went the modest stocks I'd held for decades. Every penny went toward establishing a safe, predictable fortress for Leo. Our 2-bedroom apartment became a sanctuary. The walls were painted a calming muted gray, the lights were dimmed with special filters, and his room was a perfect replica of his old one, right down to the arrangement of his books. I became an expert in the language of stims and scripting, the patterns of his anxiety, and the breathtaking beauty of his logic. For the first 4 years we were invisible. Cassandra, meanwhile, was highly visible. She was busy. She was finding herself, climbing the corporate ladder, moving from a nice condo to a townhouse, then posting pictures of herself on beach vacations. She occasionally remembered we existed, and that was when the slow burn of tension truly began. The pretend care was worse than total silence. It was calculated performance. She'd call sometimes, usually on the weekend, and it always followed the same script. "Mom, hi. How are you holding up?" She'd chirp, the sound of traffic or sometimes a loud restaurant in the background. "We're fine, Cassandra. Leo had a great week." He finally managed a full conversation about. She'd cut me off with an enthusiastic sigh. "Oh, that's so good. I'm glad you're enjoying your time with him. Listen, I can't talk long. I'm at a networking brunch, huge clients here, but I just wanted to check in and make sure you're okay. Remember, I'm always here for you, Mom. If you need anything small, like emotional support." She never offered practical help, never offered a weekend, never sent money. Her calls were entirely about proving to herself that she was a good person without having to do the actual work of one. Her check-ins were transactional, a low-effort way to purchase a feeling of righteousness. If I ever mentioned a financial need, a busted washing machine or the soaring cost of his therapy, she would become instantly vague. "Oh, money is so tight right now, Mom. You wouldn't believe the property taxes on the new house. But you're so resourceful. You'll figure it out." One Christmas, when Leo was 12 and had started to articulate his thoughts through the keyboard, he created a simple digital card for Cassandra. It was a beautiful fractal pattern that shifted colors according to a specific mathematical sequence. When Cassandra came over, for exactly 45 minutes between a yoga class and a client dinner, I showed it to her proudly. "Look, Cass, he wrote a custom algorithm for this pattern. It's stunning," I said, my heart swelling. She barely glanced at the screen, running a manicured finger over the leather of her new designer handbag. "That's nice, Mom. He's certainly focused. But isn't it time he had some normal hobbies? Like basketball or maybe learning guitar. Something that translates into social skills. You don't want him to be totally weird, do you?" The word weird landed like a slap. It was the first time she had openly used language to dismiss his unique mind, but it wouldn't be the last. The major first insult that truly foreshadowed her ultimate betrayal happened a year later. Leo, now 15, had become proficient in Python and JavaScript. He had spent his evenings building simple calculator apps and complex logic games, finding solace in the perfect order of code. I knew with certainty that this was his path. I was struggling. The washing machine had finally died beyond repair, and I was doing laundry by hand. I admitted this to Cassandra during one of her brief, patronizing check-ins. "Oh, that's terrible, Mom. But listen, I actually called because I need your help," she said, her voice shifting into a smooth, persuasive register. She was buying a weekend fishing boat with her new boyfriend and needed to make a quick $10,000 down payment to secure the deal. "I need you to float me the money, just until my next bonus clears." I was stunned. "Cassandra, I told you I'm washing clothes in the sink. I have maybe $200 until the end of the month. I liquidated my retirement account years ago. Come on, Mom, don't be dramatic. You must have that awful gold coin collection Grandpa gave you. Or that ugly old clock in the living room. Sell it. You don't need it. I need this boat. It's a huge networking opportunity for Julian. And you should be happy to help me secure my future." I felt a cold rage settle over me. "I am not selling the last few things I own to fund a leisure purchase for you, Cassandra. I'm using what little I have left to take care of the son you abandoned." Her voice hardened instantly, dropping the pretense of care. "That's selfish, Mom. Utterly selfish. After everything I've done for you, letting you live rent-free in my life, and you won't even help your own daughter succeed. Honestly, I think you just resent my success. You resent that I got out and made something of myself while you're stuck playing babysitter to a boy who will never amount to anything. A boy who will never amount to anything." I hung up the phone without another word, my hand shaking. That night I watched Leo, headphones on, his fingers flying across the keyboard, a peaceful, focused expression on his face. He wasn't just building a simple game anymore. He was constructing a detailed, multi-level application designed to teach children advanced math concepts through visual, pattern-based learning. He was focused, brilliant, and creating value the world hadn't realized it needed. I looked at his work, then at the phone I had just used to speak to his mother. Cassandra's true character was etched permanently into those words. Entitlement, dismissal, and casual cruelty. She viewed Leo as a burden and me as an ATM. It was then, years before the explosion, that I made my promise. I promised Leo and myself that no matter what he achieved, Cassandra would never be allowed to touch it. I started looking into the legal structures for intellectual property and financial independence for minors with special needs. I began building my secret weapon, brick by bureaucratic brick. A few years later, the app Quantus Explorer hit the market. It became an overnight sensation, solving the puzzle of making complex algebra intuitive for visual learners. Within 6 months, the revenue projections soared. Within a year, the first buyout offer came in, $3.2 million. That's when Cassandra finally decided she was ready to be a mother again. The moment she heard the news from a mutual acquaintance, the calls started. They weren't calls of congratulations. They were calls of entitlement. And 3 months later, she showed up with the lawyer, making good on her threat to claim her son's future. The stage was set, and the battle was finally real. The atmosphere in our apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt heavy, permeated by the stale scent of printer ink and legal threats. Cassandra didn't wait long after the initial hostile meeting. 2 weeks later, a courier delivered a thick, oppressive packet of documents. This was the overt, greedy action I knew was coming, but seeing it materialized in professional typeface made my stomach turn cold. The core of the document, a petition for guardianship and financial conservatorship, was a masterpiece of legal malice. It didn't just target the $3.2 million cash offer from the preliminary buyer. It targeted Leo's entire future. Cassandra's legal strategy, orchestrated by Mr. Thorne, was simple and brutal. Exploit the disability to seize the asset. The petition meticulously outlined every single symptom of Leo's autism that could be misconstrued as incompetence. It listed his strict adherence to routine as an inability to adapt to market fluctuations. It highlighted his deep focus on coding and his avoidance of eye contact as a failure to engage in essential contract negotiations. It even cited his history of sensory overwhelm, which I had meticulously documented for his doctors, as evidence of an unstable and unpredictable emotional state, making him susceptible to undue influence. The document presented Cassandra as the savior. It painted me, Eleanor, as an aging, emotionally compromised, and financially incapable grandparent whose primary function had been merely physical care, not managerial oversight. The irony was so bitter it tasted like ash. I was the one who had navigated his therapies, learned Python basics just to communicate with him, and set up the initial small-scale LLC under which Quantus Explorer was launched. Cassandra, who spent 10 years erasing him from her life, now presented herself as the only one capable of stewarding his sudden, accidental wealth. The funds should be managed by a responsible, financially stable professional with the appropriate legal standing. The document summarized, omitting the crucial fact that she was the only responsible, financially stable professional listed, who also happened to be the biological mother in line for a massive windfall. The initial hearing was set for 6 weeks away. I felt a desperate, cold fear. I had protected him from every threat in the world, from unkind stares, from loud noises, from institutional failure. But how do you protect a sensitive, brilliant mind from a legal system that recognizes blood ties over actual care? My first calls were devastating. The local legal aid services heard the dollar amount and instantly disqualified me. Reputable, specialized disability lawyers demanded exorbitant retainers, money I simply did not have, as most of Leo's early revenue was locked into the preliminary app holding account, exactly where Cassandra wanted it, out of my reach. I was helpless, cornered by a daughter who knew my financial limitations intimately. I spent the next 2 weeks in a state of frantic, quiet panic, reading through every line of the petition, my protective instincts screaming, I knew the conservatorship was about money, but the language was too cold, too final. There had to be more to it than just seizing the $3.2 million. Cassandra's greed was vast, but her cruelty was legendary. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the first layer of the plot. I found the opening by accident. While Leo was engrossed in a massive server update for Qantas Explorer, I took a break to grab a coffee. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the legal papers, when I noticed a faint, almost invisible watermark on one of the exhibits, a logo of a different, larger venture capital firm than the one that made the $3.2 million offer. The font was tiny and almost obscured by Mr. Thorne's letterhead. Why would a different VC firm be subtly referenced in a document about Leo's incompetence? My mind raced back to the night Cassandra dismissed Leo as a boy who will never amount to anything. She didn't want him. She wanted the resource he generated. The $3.2 million was the shiny bait, but I suspected the real target was the golden egg, the underlying code and the intellectual property, the IP. I used the firm's name to search LinkedIn and found a connection. Mr. Thorne, Cassandra's lawyer, had previously done a large amount of work for them, specifically in IP acquisition and dissolution of small tech startups. That was it. I needed to know what Cassandra and Thorne were really planning to do with Leo and the app once they controlled the conservatorship. Knowing I couldn't afford surveillance, I resorted to a desperate, old-school maneuver. I found the phone number for Mr. Thorne's firm's main office and called late on a Friday afternoon, right before closing time. When the receptionist answered, I dropped my voice and assumed a highly formal, elderly accent, mimicking a distant, demanding client. Yes, my name is Mrs. Aldridge, and I need to speak to Mr. Thorne's paralegal immediately. It's about a very sensitive inheritance issue regarding a new client. I believe the name is Qantas. The receptionist, clearly tired and ready for the weekend, transferred me to a paralegal, a young man named Kevin. I launched into a convoluted, distracting monologue about my imaginary estate, occasionally dropping in casual questions about the Qantas case. Kevin was patient but clearly bored. He wanted off the phone. I'm just clarifying the estate of the young inventor, the Qantas app, I pressed gently. The legal documents are so complex. I assume the goal is simply to secure the liquid funds for his welfare, yes. Kevin sighed into the phone. Yeah, that's the public goal, Mrs. Aldridge. But look, strictly between you and me, the real win here is the IP. It's a cash play. Thorne's partner firm, Synergy Global, they've got a competing math learning platform. They want the core algorithm. They're going to buy the IP for maybe $8 million, shelve the Qantas app, dissolve the LLC, and then incorporate the tech into their own platform. The $3.2 million? That's just the initial offer the court sees. The real value is the IP sale for the second deal. The breath left my lungs. $8 million. And the plan was to shelve Leo's app, destroy his creation, and hide the massive profit. And the boy? I asked, my voice cracking slightly despite my attempt at an accent. Kevin scoffed, sounding utterly disconnected. Oh, he's, autistic. The plan is a low-cost, long-term care arrangement. Cassandra gets her 10% cut of the $8 million, Thorne takes his fee, and the boy is placed where he can be monitored without draining the conservatorship. Minimal overhead. It's all very neat, Mrs. Aldridge. Minimal overhead. Institutionalized. Stripped of his life's work. The rage I felt was so pure, so vast, it almost made me laugh. This wasn't just about money. It was about erasing Leo completely, professionally, and forever, just as Cassandra had done 10 years ago. She wasn't just abandoning him. She was selling him for parts. I ended the call quickly, thanked Kevin profusely for his clarity, and hung up. I stood in the quiet kitchen, looking at the door to Leo's room. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. She wanted a legal battle? She was going to get one. But it wouldn't be over who was the better caregiver. It would be a battle fought on the single piece of ground where Cassandra thought she was invincible. Legal structure and intellectual property law. That night, after Leo had gone to sleep, I moved with the silent, focused intensity of a commando. I pulled out a worn leather-bound safe deposit key from a hidden compartment behind a loose baseboard in my bedroom closet. This was the moment I had planned for, the consequence of that night years ago when Cassandra told me Leo would never amount to anything. My secret weapon was a set of legal documents prepared not by a flashy corporate lawyer, but by a quiet, brilliant pro bono law professor I had met through Leo's specialized therapy group. A woman who understood that neurodivergent genius needed a unique shield. I drove out late to the downtown notary I had scheduled weeks prior, under the pretense of updating a will. The notary, a solemn man who worked until midnight for extra income, reviewed the thick packet I presented. These weren't the conservatorship papers. They were something far more ironclad. The documents were complex, leveraging an obscure section of state law regarding the legal standing of creative minors with specific disabilities. They established a non-revocable, legally binding special needs trust, S&T, and more importantly, a Creative Property Management Agreement, CPMA. The CPMA stipulated that the intellectual property, Quantus Explorer, was owned not by Leo as an individual, but by the trust with two irrevocable mandated trustees, myself, Eleanor, and a third party, an independent certified IP attorney. The document made it impossible for any single non-trust appointed entity, like a conservator, to sell, transfer, or license the IP without a unanimous vote of the three trustees. Crucially, this trust was funded and executed before Cassandra had filed her petition. It was legally active and impenetrable. I signed the final documents, notarized and dated, and slipped the originals into the safe deposit box. The attorney's fees were paid using a tiny, segregated portion of Leo's early revenue, a perfectly legal move I had justified as business protection expenses. Cassandra knew nothing of this expense, nor the trust, nor the third trustee. Driving home in the quiet, empty streets, I felt a calm I hadn't known in weeks. Cassandra and Mr. Thorne were maneuvering to steal an $8 million IP under the guise of parental concern. They were building their legal mansion on the assumption that Leo and I were financially defenseless. They had built a beautiful, greedy trap, but they failed to check the foundation. They missed the fact that the property they were trying to seize was no longer legally Leo's to lose. My heart was beating slow and steady. The battle was coming, and I was going to let Cassandra walk right through the door of the courtroom, arrogant and ready to claim her victory. She was about to find out that her incompetent son had already created an unbreachable legal firewall, and her financially incapable mother was the one who had built it. The climax was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, agonizing suffocation inside the small wood-paneled courtroom annex reserved for family law mediation. It wasn't a trial, but a highly formalized hearing before Judge Eris, who sat elevated above us, weary and detached, as if presiding over the 1,000th story of familial greed he'd seen that year. My own stomach was knotted with a fear that was both physical and existential. I wasn't afraid of losing money. I was terrified of losing Leo's world. Mr. Thorne, Cassandra's attorney, opened his presentation with the practiced ease of a man reading a supermarket flyer. He spoke of dutiful obligation, prudent fiscal management, and the undeniable tragedy of specialized needs. He didn't once mention Leo by name, referring to him only as the ward or the minor, distancing himself from any semblance of humanity. He spent 45 minutes painting a picture of me, Eleanor, that was legally devastating. Your Honor, we are not contesting the fact that Ms. Eleanor Shaw provided 10 years of physical custodial care, Thorne began, adjusting his designer spectacles. We commend her for it. But the fundamental issue before the court is financial and legal, not sentimental. Ms. Shaw has no business background, no investment expertise, and no legal training. She is quite simply incapable of protecting an asset of this magnitude. Furthermore, financially, she has lived hand to mouth. The minor's current caregiver is, in legal terms, financially compromised and susceptible to influence. He then presented a portfolio of Cassandra's credentials, her MBA, her current senior VP position, her personal net worth, and her clean, distant suburban life, all proof of her stability and competence. It was a perfect storm. Affluence disguised as ability, and neglect recast as foresight. My own lawyer, a young, tired public defender named Ms. Reyes, whom I had scraped together a tiny retainer for, just enough to be present, not enough to win, could only offer a meek rebuttal, focusing on my decade of dedication. Your Honor, Eleanor Shaw is the only constant, the only guardian who understands Leo's intricate needs. His success, Qantas Explorer, is a direct result of her providing a stable, loving environment that allowed his genius to flourish, Ms. Reyes pleaded, her voice wavering under Thorne's sneering gaze. Thorne, during cross-examination, destroyed her case with two simple, brutal questions aimed squarely at me. Ms. Shaw, is it true you sold your personal retirement savings to pay for the minor's early therapy? Yes, I admitted, meeting his eyes steadily. It was necessary. And is it true that your current income consists solely of a small caregiver stipend, and the minimal living allowance drawn from the initial app revenue? Yes. He smiled, a cold, predatory flash of teeth. No further questions, Your Honor. The defense rests its case on the lack of demonstrable financial capacity or legal sophistication to manage a multi-million-dollar intellectual property portfolio. The danger of mismanagement is acute. Then came Cassandra. She walked to the stand with the composure of a queen ascending a throne. She wore a soft, expensive lavender suit, a color chosen, I realized with a shock of clarity, to project maternal serenity. Her testimony was the most painful part of the morning. It was pure, distilled manipulation, the betrayal. Cassandra, can you tell the court why you are petitioning for conservatorship now, after all this time? Thorne asked gently. It's the right thing to do, Mr. Thorne. It's what a mother does, she began, her voice thick with fake emotion. When I left, I was in a bad place, struggling with my career, unable to provide the stable home Leo deserved. I made the painful decision to let him live with my mother, while I built a stable foundation. A stable foundation for her yacht, I thought bitterly. But now I am stable. And when I saw his sudden incredible success, $3.2 million, potentially more, I realized my son is in danger. Not from his condition but from exploitation. He's a brilliant mind, but emotionally and functionally, he's a young boy who can't understand predatory contracts. My mother loves him, yes, but her love isn't enough to protect him from the legal sharks attracted by that kind of money. Only I, as his legally and financially sound parent, can give him the professional shield he needs. She spoke of Leo as a fragile object, a glass figurine she was retrieving from a dusty shelf. She never mentioned his joy, his jokes, or the intricate, beautiful complexity of his mind. She only mentioned the money and the risk. Judge Aris leaned forward, his expression grave. Miss Shaw, your daughter has presented a compelling argument regarding the financial security of the minor's assets. While the court recognizes your immense personal sacrifice, the law requires us to prioritize the long-term financial stability of the ward. The initial offer alone puts the assets at severe risk under current, informal management. I am inclined to grant the petition for conservatorship on financial grounds, with certain conditions. The word struck me like a physical blow. I am inclined to grant the petition. My world crumbled into a gray, featureless landscape. I stared at the scarred surface of the table, feeling the weight of 10 years of struggle press down on me. All the work, the therapy, the patience, the legal research, the hope, was about to be nullified by the stroke of a judge's pen. It wasn't just the money. It was the knowledge of what came next. Kevin, the paralegal, had confirmed their plot. Synergy Global, the $8 million sale, and the dissolving of Leo's identity and his creation. Cassandra wouldn't just take the money. She would erase the app that was Leo's voice, his passion, his connection to the world. She would take away his purpose and shunt him into a low-cost care arrangement, abandoning him for the second and final time. The betrayal was complete. She had used his vulnerability, the very condition that made him her son, as a weapon to steal the future he had built. I had known she was cruel, but I hadn't known she was capable of this level of cold, methodical destruction. Ms. Reyes leaned over and whispered, Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I think we've lost. Thorne's case is airtight. She's too polished and the money is too big. I nodded numbly, trying to force oxygen into my lungs. The legal shield I had built, my secret weapon, suddenly felt flimsy, a paper boat against a tidal wave of corporate greed. Did I miss a step? Was the trust insufficient? Doubt, a crushing, heavy doubt settled over me. I felt the tears pressing behind my eyes, tears not for myself, but for the boy at home, whose triumph was about to become his tragedy. Cassandra glanced over at me, catching my eye. She didn't look triumphant. She looked utterly bored, already mentally spending the money. She offered a tiny condescending tilt of her chin. A gesture that said, "You did your job, now get out of the way." That look, the utter disregard, was the match that reignited the cold fury inside me, pushing the despair away. I had to hold on. The moment was coming. Judge Eris cleared his throat, looking at Thorne. "Mr. Thorne, before I issue a preliminary ruling, I need absolute clarity on the future of the intellectual property. The Quantus Explorer app is highly successful and clearly beneficial to the public. If the conservatorship is granted, what is the plan for its operation? Will the existing LLC remain active? And will the app remain commercially available?" This was the opening I had been waiting for. This was the moment Cassandra, drunk on her apparent victory, would overstep. Thorne, confident that the legal battle was won, looked briefly uncomfortable, having been briefed on the hidden plan to sell the IP. He stammered slightly. "Your Honor, the initial $3.2 million offer, which triggered this entire proceeding, requires the continued operation of the LLC, which my client as conservator would of course honor. The app will remain active and continue to generate revenue for the ward's benefit." Cassandra, however, couldn't tolerate even that small lawyerly equivocation. She wanted to sound more decisive, more ethical, and more in control than Thorne. She leaned into the microphone herself, violating court etiquette, and addressed the judge directly, her voice dripping with sincerity. "Your Honor, I want to be perfectly clear," she announced, loud and smooth, staring directly at the judge. "I have no intention of selling the core algorithm or the intellectual property of Quantus Explorer to any outside firm. The app is my son's legacy. I will not dissolve the existing LLC, and I promise to maintain the app's operational integrity. I will ensure the full, unfettered continuity of Quantus Explorer under its current management structure. This is not about selling assets. It's about protecting them for his future." She had done it. In her eagerness to appear selfless and assure the judge of her long-term maternal commitment, she had sworn on the record that she would not sell the IP and not dissolve the LLC, the two core requirements for the secret $8 million deal with Synergy Global. She had dismissed the entire complex legal reality of the situation in favor of a clean emotional lie. Thorne winced, shooting her a look of pure professional terror. She had just boxed them into a corner and potentially committed perjury about her true intentions. But it was too late. Judge Eris nodded, satisfied. He looked ready to deliver his ruling. I straightened my spine. My moment had arrived. The despair was gone. Cassandra thought she was holding all the cards, but she had just made a formal, recorded promise to protect an asset she didn't realize she had absolutely no legal standing to manage or sell. I finally raised my hand, my voice calm and steady, utterly unlike the defeated woman she thought she had crushed. "Your Honor," I said, "before you rule, I have one essential piece of evidence to present regarding the current management structure of Quantus Explorer." Cassandra turned to me, her face a mask of annoyed disbelief. Her eyes asked, "What could you possibly have?" She still thought I was arguing over custody, not control. Judge Eris looked down at me, a slight frown creasing his brow. My unexpected intervention, after my own lawyer had effectively folded, was a desperate, final act. "Ms. Shaw, this court is satisfied with the mother's sworn testimony regarding the continuity of the asset," the judge stated. "If you have legal documentation that supersedes the parental right to conservatorship, I suggest you present it now, or I will rule." I stood, my back straight, refusing to look at Cassandra, whose face was a study in condescending impatience. I walked slowly to Ms. Reyes and handed her the thick, notarized portfolio from the safe deposit box. Your Honor, I began, projecting my voice clearly across the room. We are not contesting Cassandra's fitness as a mother, nor are we contesting her financial stability. We are contesting the fact that she is petitioning for control over an asset, Quantus Explorer, that is not legally Leo's to have managed, and which by extension is not legally hers to receive as a conservator. Thorne scoffed. Objection, Your Honor. The IP is clearly held by the Miners LLC, which is solely owned by the miner. It was solely owned by the miner, Mr. Thorne. I cut in, my voice unwavering. On record, the miner transferred the ownership of the intellectual property on September 14th of last year, 4 months before your client filed this petition. The room went silent. Cassandra's bored expression snapped into immediate stunned fury. Ms. Reyes, still slightly confused but following my lead, approached the bench and presented the document. Your Honor, this is the legal instrument that governs the Quantus Explorer intellectual property. It is a Special Needs Trust, SNT, and a Creative Property Management Agreement, CPMA, legally established and notarized on September 14, 2021. Judge Aris took the document, his interest piqued. He adjusted his glasses and began to read, his eyes moving rapidly over the specialized clauses. I continued, detailing the complexity that Thorne had dismissed me as incapable of understanding. This agreement states that due to Leo's age and specific needs, the intellectual property was assigned to the SNT. The trust is designed to fund Leo's long-term care and financial independence, shielding the asset from all forms of legal challenge, including conservatorship claims. Furthermore, the Creative Property Management Agreement names 3 irrevocable, mandated trustees to govern the IP, myself, the caregiver, and a third, independent party. I paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. I then played my final card. Your Honor, Cassandra testified moments ago that she would not sell the IP and would maintain the app's operational integrity under its current management structure. Since September 14th, the current management structure is the trust, which requires a unanimous vote of all 3 trustees to sell or dissolve the LLC. I turned, my gaze finally locking onto a now pale Cassandra. And Your Honor, the third, independent and legally required trustee is a board-certified intellectual property attorney named Mr. Lawrence Peterson. I looked back at the judge. Mr. Peterson has been briefed on the hidden $8 million offer from Synergy Global, the very deal Cassandra and Mr. Thorne were secretly orchestrating. The trust's primary mandate is to protect Leo's creation and ensure its continuity, which Mr. Peterson has affirmed the trust will do. Therefore, any attempt by Cassandra to sell the IP or dissolve the LLC, as her firm was planning, would require the unanimous consent of 3 trustees, 2 of whom, myself and Mr. Peterson, will vote no. Cassandra didn't scream or cry immediately. Her first reaction was a terrible silent explosion of disbelief. Her elegant lavender suit suddenly looked ridiculous. She looked at Thorne, her eyes wide, demanding an explanation. Thorne, who realized his junior paralegal, Kevin, must have inadvertently tipped me off, was already sinking in his chair, furiously flipping through his documents, realizing his entire case was built on a legal fiction, the assumption that the IP was still vulnerable. This is a forgery. It's fabricated. My mother is trying to steal my son's money. Cassandra finally shrieked, leaping to her feet, abandoning her polite courtroom veneer. Judge Aris slammed his gavel down. Miss Shaw, be silent. I am reviewing a notarized, pre-filed, and legally sound trust instrument. This document is valid. It predates your petition and, more critically, it was executed using the miner's funds for the express purpose of asset protection, which is entirely permissible under state law. He looked at Thorne. Mr. Thorne, did your due diligence include checking the UCC filings or the corporate registry to determine the actual beneficial ownership of the LLC holding the IP? Thorne stammered, his professional mask dissolving into sweat. Your Honor, we assumed the miner was the sole owner. Standard practice, given the parental relationship. Assumption is the enemy of law, counsel, the judge said sternly. He looked back at Cassandra, his previous neutrality replaced by cold contempt. Ms. Shaw, your entire petition is predicated on the idea that the minor's assets are unprotected and require your immediate, superior management. This S&T and CPMA prove the opposite. The assets were already protected by a sophisticated, non-revocable, and binding legal instrument that explicitly shields them from this exact kind of predatory maneuvering. He then delivered the final, crushing judgment on her character. Furthermore, your sworn testimony that you would ensure the full unfettered continuity of the app is directly contradicted by your counsel's own implied admission that they failed to verify the IP's legal status before preparing for a subsequent, undisclosed $8 million sale to a firm tied to your attorney. It suggests a high degree of premeditated intent to misrepresent your motives to this court. Cassandra was weeping now, not tears of sorrow but tears of pure thwarted rage. He's my son. I'm his mother. I deserve that money. She's just a grandmother, she's nobody. The record shows, Ms. Shaw, the judge said icily, that the grandmother is the trustee of an impenetrable fund that will secure your son's financial future, and you are currently in violation of multiple ethical and legal standards before this court. Conservatorship denied. I felt the immense weight lift off my chest. It was done. The betrayal had been neutralized by the foresight of love, and the meticulous nature of a boy who only knew perfect order. Cassandra didn't wait for the closing remarks. She threw her chair back, her face mottled and distorted by failure, and stormed out of the courtroom, bumping hard into the doorframe. She didn't look back at me, only at Thorne, who now looked like a ghost, his career possibly ruined by her greed and his own carelessness. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Cassandra. First, the conservatorship petition was dismissed with prejudice, meaning she could never file again on the same grounds. Judge Aris ordered a review of Mr. Thorne's professional conduct, specifically regarding the undisclosed corporate partner Synergy Global and the implied conflict of interest, a move that would, at the very least, result in a severe reprimand and potentially the end of his career. Second, the financial consequence was far more painful for her. The trust agreement included a clause, which I had insisted upon years ago, that stipulated that any individual who attempts a frivolous or bad faith legal challenge against the trust for the purpose of personal financial gain would be responsible for all accrued legal defense fees. The final summary was read out. Cassandra was now liable for every cent I had spent defending the trust. Ms. Reyes calculated the figure, including the small retainer, the filing fees, and the cost of the third, specialized trustee's brief consultation. The total was $48,000, a massive sum for a defense but a perfectly tailored punishment. She didn't get the $8 million. She didn't get the $3.2 million. She didn't even get to walk away clean. She was handed a bill for the entire battle she had started. A final, inescapable financial consequence that confirmed she was not just morally bankrupt, but actually poorer for having tried to steal from her son. The money was safe, locked down, and working exactly as planned, exclusively for Leo. The end of the trial didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like the quiet, profound relief of putting down a heavy weight I'd carried for 15 years. Cassandra was gone, dismissed from our lives by a gavel strike in her own ruinous greed. The financial and legal nightmare was over, and the path ahead for Leo was clear, secure, and entirely his own. The first thing I did was sell the old bungalow. It held too many memories of scraping by, of worry, and of Cassandra's cruelty. Thanks to the legal victory, and the immediate cash flow from the trust's management structure, I purchased a small modern house outside of Austin, Texas. It was designed to be a haven for Leo. It had a dedicated soundproofed coding studio with banks of monitors, and most importantly, a large, well-organized garden where Leo could indulge his passion for geometric precision in nature. The tranquility was palpable. Leo thrived in the new environment. The pressure of being the sole source of income was gone, replaced by the calm routine of development and discovery. We hired a dedicated, highly trained special needs aide, Ms. Anya, who understood how to facilitate Leo's growth without stifling his genius. For the first time, Leo wasn't just managing, he was flourishing. He continued to manage Qantas Explorer, But now he did it with joy, not necessity. My own peace returned in waves. I no longer had to work 3 jobs. I finally took the trip I had dreamed of since my husband passed. 2 weeks traversing the Swiss Alps, breathing air that felt clean of manipulation and fear. I realized that my self-worth wasn't tied to my income or my role as a martyr. It was tied to the unyielding protection I provided. I was Eleanor the protector, and I had won. One evening, sitting in the new sunlit living room, watching Leo meticulously debug a feature, I reflected on the irony. Cassandra had dismissed my love as weak and my labor as worthless. Yet, it was the administrative, financial, and legal groundwork I had quietly laid, the stuff she couldn't be bothered to understand, that had become the invincible fortress protecting the $3.2 million. My love was not weak. It was the strongest possible foundation for the most complex legal architecture. I heard about Cassandra only once more, about a year after the judgment. It wasn't intentional. It came via an old neighborhood friend who was innocently gossiping. Cassandra's fiancé Derek had left her almost immediately after the trial when his lawyer confirmed she was liable for the $48,000 legal fees and had zero claim on the app money. She was forced to sell her leased car and move into a small windowless studio apartment, far from the polished life she coveted. Thorne's career had been permanently tarnished by the judge's inquiry, and the promise of the $8 million was vaporized. The last image I received wasn't visual but verbal. She was working retail, checking IDs at a low-end grocery store, constantly complaining to anyone who would listen about her psycho mother, and that failure of a son. The entitlement hadn't died. It had curdled into bitter, unmovable resentment. She would likely spend the rest of her life in the agonizing belief that she was cheated out of millions, never realizing she was the one who threw the golden ticket away when she abandoned Leo. Her hatred and regret were now solely her burden to carry. I smiled, not out of malice, but from the deep, quiet satisfaction of finality. The only wealth that truly matters is the strength of your own foundation, and the greatest revenge is simply building a life too strong for betrayal to penetrate.